My name is Austin Peters, and in June of 2014 I took a birthright trip to Israel.
My name is Sahar Halabi, and I am a Palestinian.
I thought that Israel would be dangerous a little bit. I thought that I would see things that I wouldn't see in America, which I did, but not to the extreme that I imagined them to be.
I must say that having moved from England across that small pond, it dawned on me that the mentality or the perception or the let's say the awareness of what's going on in the Middle East is probably two ends of a spectrum, the opposite. In the United States, my perception was that, first of all, there is very little knowledge of the actual history behind it. Second of all, there's a lot of suppression in the media of the other side, the other point of view. And not just that, it gets more complicated because even if you go to think tanks, for example, where they have a point of view from the Israeli side, they will never provide that from the Palestinian one.
Israel is glorified in some ways, and Palestine is looked at as somewhat of a terrorist nation in the mainstream. I think if you read the BBC, you'll have more of a sense of what's actually happening.
Shall we say that Israel is perhaps represented in a better light than, say, Detroit? Mm-hmm. Or in a better light than the real issues that actually affect the Americans? Let's take, for example, the recent war in Gaza. I tried my best not to watch American outlets because they did not categorically represent the truth. And this is a little sad because for journalistic honesty and credibility, one has to be neutral and fair, to say the least. But to be completely on the other side was absolutely startling. There had been a lot more death and destruction than anyone would have realized just watching the CNN or Fox News. For the 50 days of the war, it was a very difficult time. For 50 days, I had not seen any honest reporting anywhere. And there seemed to be that cliche of words. When one says Gaza, then one means Hamas, equates terrorism. And if you are brandished that way, then you're not human. You are, in fact, subhuman. Example, Hamas is using their own people as human shields, or this is a better one. Palestinian women in Gaza teach their children how to die, to kill themselves because they hate the Jews so much. No. Even animals love their children, the offspring. Mm-hmm. No one does that. The conditions that the Palestinians there were living during the war, and at the moment, at present, could be called concentration camp conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So,
what was the most honest news outlet, do you think? What were you getting your honesty from?
Al Jazeera.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you now categorically that Al Jazeera is honest. And if one does not believe me, then one has to consider why would Bush wanted to bomb Al Jazeera on a couple of, actually bombed once in Afghanistan, threatened to do so in in Baghdad, and on top of that, Al Jazeera officers in Gaza were shot at during the recent conflict, the recent war. Journalists. So much for freedom of speech.
I think it's a good political move to support a country that's surrounded on three sides by enemies who had an atrocity happen to them 60, 70 years ago, and suffered 6 million casualties from it. I think it just looks good and looks really good. And I don't think that I'm ungrateful to the United States for helping Israel to be a nation. I just think it could have been done differently, maybe with less haste. If you go to Tel Aviv, the walls are paper thin. Like, a lot of the buildings, the infrastructure is ridiculous. Like, if there were to be an earthquake, the whole city would crumble. So it was built in haste in a lot of ways, and Tel Aviv is, in some ways, like, the center point of the attraction of Israel. But it's a rickety city. And I think that it's also another way for the United States to have someplace to go in the Middle East, because the Middle East is so opposed to the United States for reasons that I don't understand or claim to understand. So I just think it's a good geographical move. It's a good political move, and it helps Jews in America that maybe haven't been to Israel or are from an older generation that experienced the Holocaust and feel that the Jewish people needed a homeland, to feel good that the United States is putting money into something that they believe in.
There's not much dissent. I'm assuming that things are changing, or they had started to change after the war in Gaza. The problem is this: it does not matter what people think. It does not matter whether or not one has a debate. The decisions regarding supporting Israel, the decisions are made, and that is not going to change. The people in power, the people that have the means and have the money and have the influence, will carry on doing what they want to do. Let's say, for example, that something changes around and everyone is aware of the fact that we are paying billions of dollars to support Israel. By the way, it's not $3 billion a year. This is the official number. It's far more than that, loan guarantees and what have you. But anyway, let's say someone one day wakes up and thinks, well, why are we supposed to do that? After all, Israel has a GDP that is equivalent to that of Spain. Yet, we've got a very poor infrastructure here in America. Yet, there's a big debate still raging about whether or not Americans should have health insurance and so on and so forth. That will still not change a thing, because it's a misperception that people make their own decisions and therefore elect the officials that would carry out those decisions in a democratic process. That is not the case, and it will remain the same.
It's a lot of tourists, a lot of people coming there to just see Jerusalem and the old city, because it was built in layers. It's really interesting to see, to walk through corridors that are centuries old, even though they've, repaved a lot of it. It's not necessarily the original concrete or the original stone. But it's beautiful and it's moving. Being at the Western Wall is a really moving thing. There's an energy about it that you just get. You're supposed to go there, you put on the tefillin, which is like Jewish prayer. It's like you wrap it around your arm and it goes around your head, and it's got the Via Hafta inside of it, I believe. And you go and you say a prayer. You write a note, wishes for something. I remember, I don't remember what I wrote, but I remember taking a picture of it because I knew I'd forget because I have the worst memory. And then you put it in the wall because it's symbolic and you feel something from it. And I don't know, why I felt something from it. I imagine there's people that go there and think it's bullshit. That's fine. Everyone can see things differently. I personally was moved by it because of what I felt when I was standing in front of it. It's hard to describe.
As a stateless person, I actually did not have a passport or citizenship until I moved to England, and I, around the time I graduated from medical school and I got my citizenship there, I could not travel anywhere freely without visas and stuff, and least of all, Israel. I mean, as a Palestinian refugee with Syrian travel documents, of course, you cannot go in. In 2009, I went there for the first time. It coincided with my 40th birthday, yes, I am old, and I volunteered for a hospital in Nablus. The conditions were horrible. That was the first time I went, and that was it. I've been going there every 2 years or so. I was last there last December gone, a couple of months ago, 3 months ago. I went to Jerusalem, and that was an interesting thing. Went to Jerusalem, I crossed the borders from Jordan. Maybe we'll talk about that thing later. Was looking for a New Year's Eve party. And I went to Ramallah on the first day of the year. In the evening, I heard, whilst dining, explosions. That's in Ramallah, which is the capital of the Palestinian Authority. It turns out that the Israeli army had barged in with tear gas and sound bombs, and about 100 of them, to arrest 2 Palestinians right in the heart of Ramallah. And it was a frightening thing, actually. Well, not frightening in terms of safety, it's frightening for safety of the people. Mm-hmm. And I did see the youth coming out of their homes, covering their faces, of course, for fear of being known, and rushing to throw stones at the invaders that were armed to the hilt with, of course, our money. The following day, I went to Belin, and Belin is a village very close to Ramallah, where the Israeli separation wall intended and managed to separate the villagers from the farmland.
Zionism was a concept introduced to me when I was still in Hebrew school studying for my bar mitzvah that I didn't know much about. And it seemed to me that most of the people at my temple, I think, were Zionists. That seems to be because just the way you talk about Israel in a synagogue, you talk about it like it's the homeland. And so I literally thought it was homeland. And like Israel, I think, in a synagogue is more symbolic than literal. You talk about Israel as being the homeland. It's not something to always be taken literally. So that people who are not Zionists can talk about Israel as more of a hypothetical, I suppose, because it means home. It means like homeland. It's like it's Yisrael. You know, it's like it's the place that's where everything in the Old Testament happened.
So you can see that there's something here in Hebrew. I don't know which side this is showing. Something here in Hebrew. Okay. This says in Arabic, Jawaz al-Safar, passport. Something in Hebrew. Hukumat Palestine, which means the government of Palestine. Something underneath it in Hebrew. It's badly damaged, but I'm glad I had it resurrected. My mother got this from my uncle who lives in Damascus. He's old now, and I'm glad that she managed to get that at least. Now, so that was issued in 1938, 8th of August 1938, and it's signed by the High Commissioner. See that? High Commissioner Al-Mandub Al-Sami. Oh, that was my grandfather. Oh, it's a bit dishy now.
Great mustache.
Yeah. That was
That's amazing.
Quite in fashion, was in vogue. So that was his date of birth, 1898. Merchant, Akka.
This is your mother's father or your brother?
Mm-hmm. So that's my mother's name, Amal, Iqbal Amal, and then they kept adding to them. Of course, we had to. There were a lot of children. I must say that the way Israel is at the moment, as Jewish state only, is against the course of history. If Israel is to survive, that has to change. Changing that comes from education and being honest, candidly honest about how it came to happen. The revisionist Zionists, the new historians that are talking about the history of Al-Nakba, or what they call the Israel War of Independence, they're coming up with great evidence, scholarly work about how it really happened, and it's not the Israeli narrative. It is not true that the Arabs left because they don't want to live with the Jews. No one does that.
Right.
People flee at time of wars, and they flee because of a reason, because they are afraid for themselves, for their lives, and for the children. This has happened throughout history. It happened in Europe, it happened in Africa, it happened everywhere. Not to allow those refugees to return tells you a lot about the nature of the state and the fact that there's not going to be a common understanding. Let's just sit together and talk about it. Well, yes, of course, people come up with ideas and they hide certain facts, and no one can be faulted for not knowing, but one can be faulted for not looking for the truth. The way I see it is a one state, that's going to end the bloodshed, a one state for both people. Just like I'm friends with Jewish people here, and I love them dearly, but we're equal. That is the way to go forward. Otherwise, might as well be talking about black and whites, for example, Europeans and non-Europeans. The only way forward is to understand the humanity of the other, and to understand on both sides that the existence of the other does not undermine your own.
From meeting the Israelis that I met, they seem to me like pretty open-minded people. They actually, in some ways, seem to me like very liberal people. They seem to have the ideas of humanity and coexistence in mind when they talk about Palestinian people. I think it's the higher-ups that are being given orders by the United States. So maybe if the United States stopped supplying Israel with weapons and money, that maybe a one-state solution could exist if Israel was self-sufficient and they could make their own decisions without the world police on their ass every 2 seconds.